In our policy, we're saying very clearly we do not master customer data in the public cloud or in a hybrid cloud model. And that's because of our responsibility as a bank to take care of customer data, but also do not forget we're operating in 35 different countries where you have very extreme positions from a regulation and legislation perspective. For instance, Laos versus Singapore. Laos where everything is possible, Singapore where you cannot outsource customer data outside of your Singapore presence. Going forward, we will probably end up in a hybrid approach where we are making use of our private cloud capability, but also public cloud, and we have looked at that a little bit more in detail. And to overcome all the legislation, the regulation in terms of privacy, in terms of location of data, we have come up with a cypher cloud proposition. So we're basically saying, okay, it's possible to have customer data in a public cloud capability, but that customer data is depersonalized and encrypted on the cloud provider side. So we never can compromise the customer data. A lot of businesses were looking at cloud and they needed guidance. So what we said, okay, fine, let's provide that guidance. We wrote a policy, we published that policy, and the policy is a very pragmatic, open one. So we're not blocking the business to do some elements in cloud. But we do not exclude public cloud or hybrid cloud where it makes sense. For instance, for investors relationships, we're using Salesforce. Why? Because it's time to market, there's no client data involved. It's, the business model is very good of the relevant application, so it's not an extreme position. The economies of scale you can get into a public cloud, you can get it into a private cloud. Of course, it depends on how much scale you have. We're operating in 35 countries. It's physically impossible to do a public cloud in our case. CB is a domestic bank, so it's much simpler. But if you operate in a region of 35 countries, and you have to take into account all these different regulations, and Maes in Singapore is probably the most stringent. It's physically not possible to do that. But don't forget, for most regulators, again, a public cloud contract is a material outsourcing contract. You're still a primary responsible for the quality and what's happening with that data at that public cloud. So that means you still have to do yearly inspections, you still have to sort out contingency, disaster recovery. So there's a number of capabilities you still have to do, irrespective if it is public and private. All what we're saying is that instead of making it very complex in having a bit in the private cloud and a bit in the public cloud, we're saying customer data is private for specific services where it perfectly makes sense. To do it in the cloud, we use the cloud, but it makes it much simpler. So I think the economies of scale are equally achievable in a private cloud, and long term depends on your size. Again, it's easier because you have it completely in control, which you have to do whatsoever if you put it in the public cloud, because you as a bank are still responsible for that cloud provider.